amelynek a nyelve angol nyelvű lesz, úgyhogy amennyiben valaki most érkezett, és szeretne még a szinkron tolmácsolás lehetőségébe bekapcsolódni, akkor az itt megteheti, én pedig a magam részéről most pedig át fogok váltani angol nyelvre. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We are very excited to have this discussion today with you, with our special guests. And it's indeed a very special discussion because we are going to assess the current situation of Central Europe within the larger unit of the European Union. Very often I have the impression that all too often when we are discussing Central Europe as such, we do not look inward to assess our own conditions, but instead indulge ourselves with unashamed bashing of the West, and we tend to emphasize the Western conditions. So let me be absolutely clear, make no mistake, this discussion will not be one of those instances where we lament on the moral decay of Western Europe, the eradication of the Western social fabric by migration, and we are not going to lament on the fact that 1 in 4 teenagers in the West currently identifies as LGBTQ. That is not what interests us here today. Instead, this panel will be devoted to the experiences of Central Europe, and I want to apply a very specific geopolitical lens to assess our region's position. And we just have the absolute best panelists to address these issues. And first I would like to introduce, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Miriam Lexmann, who's the member of the European Parliament, representing the Křesťansko-demokratické hnutie, which is the Christian democratic movement. It's a minor party in Slovak politics, but it has all the ambitions of getting back to the parliament in the snap elections at the end of September. And she's actually among the strongest voices decrying human rights abuses in China, particularly in relation to the Uyghur community. And as a result of her advocacy, she has been actually sanctioned by the Communist Party, which is something I really do genuinely admire. But in sharp contrast, Hungary has actively sought to attract Chinese investment and even used his veto power within the EU to block numerous statements that would condemn human rights abuses in China. And so I will be really eager to explore this tension between these two different positions. And we have our second guest, Zsolt Németh, who's a very familiar face here in the Gombaszög summer camp. He has served as Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs in Hungary. He's one of the longest-serving members of the Hungarian National Assembly, and he's also the current chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee within the National Assembly. And but above all else, he has earned our admiration for being a steadfast supporter of the Gombaszög summer camp. And also his party, again in sharp contrast to the Christian democratic movement in Slovakia, his party is in a hegemonic state in Hungary and has earned quite an international fame for being at the helm of those efforts which are aimed to decouple democracy from liberalism. So both our guests on the political right share certain common values, but there are also different political stances between the two of them in certain regards. So let me, after this long introduction, let me delve into the very first question, which would be about Central Europe as an entity. If we reverse the clock by a few years, we saw that there were European divides that by and large followed the Cold War East versus West divide, such as the rejection of migrant quotas, the emphasis on collective values such as family, communities, social relationships and religions, and so on and so on. However, I got the impression that the war in Ukraine has caused a massive fault line to emerge within the region with regards to what kind of support are we ought to provide to Ukraine. On the one end of the spectrum, there's Poland and the Baltics, which take the most hawkish anti-Russian stance, while Hungary refuses to supply weapons directly to Ukraine and also refuses the joint financial aid initiatives to Ukraine. And when it comes to Slovakia, we see that a large portion of the Slovak public shows sympathy for the Russian rationale of the war, or even towards Russia itself. So the very first question would be that, can one speak of Central Europe as an entity of its own, despite all these fault lines that I just mentioned? Who would like to begin?
Most jó. Most hallható? Hallható vagyok? Először is magyarul szeretnék elnézést kérni mindenkitől, hogy angolul beszélünk, de végül is Miriammal egyeztettünk, hogy lenne a legegyszerűbb, és mivel én nem nagyon tudok szlovákul, és még ő sem tud jól magyarul, bár az ő magyar tudása az jobb, mint az én szlovák tudásom, ezért maradtunk az angolnál. Tehát némi magyarázatot igényel ez itt a táborban, elnézést szeretnék kérni az angol nyelv használatáért. And now I would like to switch to English, and I would like to recognize and welcome among the audience the Hungarian ambassador. Thank you for joining us. Csaba Balog is an old participant of Gombaszög before he became an ambassador. So thank you, Csaba, for being with us. And I would like to recognize and welcome also Illés Boglárka, member of parliament from Hungary, former chair of Fidelitas, which is the youth wing of Fidesz, and she is very actively participating in the youth movement. And thank you, Balázs, for your introduction. I was missing only one element from this biography you have been listing, that I was one of the founding fathers of Tusványos. And Tusványos in Transylvania is the sister or brother of Gombaszög, as you like it. And I look at these summer festivals and summer universities as a original, genuine form of doing politics. And I would like to welcome all of you who are here. You could drink under a tent, but now you are with us, and I am very grateful to you for being with us and strengthening the character of our original, genuine format, this summer university, by actively participating at such an event. And if you happen to have any question, please come along and don't hesitate. And concerning Miriam, I would like to express my happiness that we are sharing this platform together. Last year it was not possible, but this year, thanks God, it was. And I am grateful to you that we could shift a bit the date from tomorrow to today. But unfortunately, tomorrow I have to go to Transylvania, to Tusványos. I will leave for Tusványos tomorrow. We are too close to each other in this regard. So, and another element which I would like to underline, that the Christian Democratic Party, KDH, is not a extra parliamentary party with the intention to enter the Slovak National Council. for me. To me, KDH is the most important traditional political party in Slovakia, which has played a vital role in the transition of from communism to democracy. And I would like to recall my experience in November 1989, when I was invited to address the huge gathering in Pozsony, the main square of Pozsony, and I could address the revolutionary movement in the National Theatre. I had lunch on that day with Mr. Czarnogórsky. And Mr. Czarnogórsky was the founder, and for a long time, the very staunch supporter of social conservative values in Europe.
Concerning the questions I just asked you, can we just move forward a bit? After you had your lunch with Czarnogórsky, which I'm sure was delightful.
It was.
Can we speak of Central Europe as an entity on its own in 2023?
Right.
If you may.
I just wanted to underline that we share with Miriam this, and we share with Slovakia and with KDH this common history, which is directly related to Central Europe. Because Central Europe is a multi-structured entity, and we are coming from somewhere historically, and hopefully we are moving towards a common future. And I am a deep believer in the existence of Central Europe, and I believe also in the Slovak-Hungarian cooperation. And I also believe that we have a lot in common. I would rather say that there are not many nations in Central Europe who are so close to each other than the Slovaks and the Hungarians, sharing a full common history, because there is not really a history outside of this scope. So we share a full history, we share basic values, and we share, I'm convinced, the intention to maintain the Central European cooperation. On the organizational level, there are a lot of Central European organizations like the Trimarium, the Three Seas Initiative, or the Bucharest 9 cooperation, or the Visegrad 4 cooperation. All of these organizations are very actively influencing the idea of Central Europeanism. And what relates these organizations and what makes it different from the European Union, that these organizations are voluntary organizations, and we cooperate where we can. And we have a lot of fields where we can cooperate. The security is an important dimension, economic and infrastructural cooperation also, and I would also underline the cultural dimension. A few days ago we lost Milan Kundera. Milan Kundera was a Czech, but he was part of the Central European credo, and he talked and wrote a lot about the similarity, the common past and the common future of the Central European nations. So I don't think that that kind of daily political disagreements that we may have, it is normal to have them, may create a kind of fault line which cannot be overbridged. Even probably we will speak about the war, the Russian-Ukrainian war. I think it is an important subject to discuss when we talk about Central Europe or China. I also agree that it would be interesting to talk about it, but it does not mean that the broad, deep, wide historical unity of the Central European nations wouldn't be a decisive factor in today's political life.
Jó napot kívánok. Köszönöm a meghívás. I'll continue in English because my Hungarian is very limited, but I have to say that I understood the introduction of Zsoltot, and he was explaining that I don't speak Hungarian, he doesn't speak Slovak, that's why we are choosing as a common language English. The mother tongue of my grandmother was Hungarian, but unfortunately, due to the prosecution of my family, the language was lost. But my niece is growing up in Rojka, next to Bratislava, and she goes to Hungarian school, so the language is coming back into the family. I'm happy to be here. As it was mentioned last year, it didn't work out, and I'm here. Happy to be here because this is a place where we are actually creating common ground for common culture, common understanding, dialogue where there is no understanding or where there are differences in our views. I am a strong believer in Central Eastern Europe, but it's not a kind of entity written in stone. I mean, Central Eastern Europe works in different formats and kind of created a way of cooperation in such a way that if there is a common ground, if there is understanding, if there is a need, we can work together. There are sometimes divergent positions. Sometimes there is a willingness to find solutions and find a position within the Central Eastern Europe because we do believe that this is important. Our voice is important inside of the European Union and as well as in the global perspective. Central Eastern Europe works also in different formats. It was mentioned the B9, it was the Trimarium was mentioned as well. We do have the Baltic states as a common entity. We have the Visegrad 4 as a common entity. We have Visegrad 4, which I really like, that the Visegrad 4 is able to embrace our neighbors like as Croatia, Austria. Sometimes there were also meetings with Germany and other countries. I think this creates a potential that because our common history and particularly the common totalitarian past is something which unites us and provides a space to seek answers to the global challenges and also to the challenges the EU is facing, which would maybe come from the totalitarian past where we might be more sensitive or makes us more sensitive to any endangering of freedom, the common values, which is democracy, rule of law, freedom, individual freedom, human dignity, protection of human life, protection of human dignity as such, and human rights. This is something which for us is non-negotiable because of the common past. Of course, it's also, when we come from the common past, we don't always have this common understanding what does this mean in the practical application. But I think it's very important that we are always coming back and we are always trying to see how fragile democracy and freedom are and try to defend it with the approach and also to kind of be like a mirror to the Western part of the European Union where we could raise our voice where we see that that our freedom and democracy might be endangered. Of course, it was mentioned that there are different views on the war, and I believe that it's very, very important that we do not avoid this topic because it's our moral duty to seek the truth and to seek the right answers to the very difficult questions.
Thank you very much for that first round. I feel I am going to have to be really strict with you, so you would avoid dodging my And analysts believe that these ties have been damaged by Budapest continuous ties to Russia. So do you maintain your claim that this is daily politics only, or maybe there's something deeper going on here?
Well, to have a war, it is a very first and very tragic experience in our generation. And how to react to a war, we are not used to it. It is something that everybody has to evaluate at family level, classmates, countries, parties, and we can see that there are different answers to the question. But you had, Balázs, another dimension of the question is the Hungarian-Polish relations. So first I would like to talk about the war and then about the Hungarian-Polish relations. So concerning the war, the Hungarian position and other Central European positions like the Polish and especially the Baltic position are quite far away from each other from the first glance. From the first glance. Because we speak about peace. And Hungary believes that peace diplomacy is something which is vital. And I am very glad to see that it is not just Hungary who represents this view or the Hungarian parties, but there is a very strong Slovak political line which falls into the same direction. I believe that you are much more familiar here with the Slovak political spectrum, but this understanding why peace is important is shared by a large community in Slovakia as well. However, I don't think that those who in the West suggest that peace is not actual would be against peace, and I don't think that we don't have important common denominators, because as far as the target, how to relate to the war is shared by us. I would like to draw your attention that there was a NATO summit yesterday. And probably you haven't had too much time to read the communique of the NATO summit. But the NATO summit made some very fundamental statements which are shared by all of us, including those who prefer urgent and imminent ceasefire, and among those who do not. So, for example, we do share the position that we condemn the military aggression of the Russians. And I would draw your attention that in the Hungarian parliament we have adopted more than one resolutions condemning the military aggression of Russia. This NATO communique, which we signed yesterday and Hungary voted in favor, reiterates it and goes a bit even further, says that Russia is responsible for the war which is happening, and Russia is accountable and must be kept accountable to this military aggression. This is a vitally important element. And we do also share that we would like to end the war and to arrive to a momentum when Russia is not anymore a threat to us and to its neighbors. Because if you read carefully the NATO communique, which is 100% supported by us, underlines that Russia remains the threat for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. There is another element which I would like to underline concerning the war, which is a common denominator, and that is that we support a territorially integer and sovereign Ukraine. We do support the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Ukraine. And it is a principle which means that we don't believe that any kind of external compromise in this regard is acceptable without the approval and decision of the Ukrainians. How to achieve these goals? How to achieve that Russia is not anymore a danger, a threat to us? And how to achieve that we are able to give back the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Ukraine is a very difficult question. We say that there is no military solution. And that's why, as there is no military solution to this present conflict, we need to move towards a ceasefire in the first phase. In a second phase, we need to move towards peace talks. Peace talks will be a very critical and long period. If we have an early ceasefire, then we will have a longer period of peace talks. If we had a longer period before ceasefire, probably we could shorten the period of the peace talks. But this kind of agreement on our side that the peace talks and the ceasefire need to be in the center of our thinking, and instead of military generals, diplomats should take over the decisive role. And at this point, the American role, the Chinese role, and all those countries who have came about a peace proposal, including the Vatican, which came about a peace proposal, will come in. So this is our firm conviction. This is where we see the common denominators and we see the differences concerning the war. And last remark, what relates Poland. Poland is a historical friend of Hungary. It was always #1 friend of Hungary among nations on the globe, and it will remain so. We have plenty of historical experiences, and I don't want to list these historical experiences. So we may have had a difficult few months behind us, but I would draw, Balázs, your attention to the fact that last week we had a European Council, and that European Council had a migration debate, and that migration debate was fundamentally influenced by Mr. Morawiecki and Mr. Orbán's common position not to allow the relocation, mandatory relocation of migrants into member states. And without the Polish-Hungarian tandem, the cooperation, that would have been pushed across. So the ability to operate together, and especially if they win the elections in October, because it is an important question what will happen at the Polish election. But we hope that the center-right conservative and Christian democratic line of the foreign policy of Poland is going to remain, and then I have no question that our friendship will continue.
Your point of view.
I will say that I was also sad to see the kind of deviating path of Poland and Hungary, Slovakia being in between these two countries. And as I said in the first, in my first comment, that it's very, very important that we keep dialogue among each other and try to do utmost that we, as the West, as the EU, as the transatlantic alliance, are united in our position. Because yes, there is agreement who is the aggressor. Yes, there is agreement that the territorial integrity of Ukraine has to be protected, because that's international law, and it's in our interest to defend international law and borders as they are set. Defend international agreements as the Budapest Agreement, where Russia is one of the guarantors of the Ukrainian borders, including Crimea. So these are very important, that there is agreement on that. But where I see, yes, as Zsolt said, that we somehow sometimes are not being able to agree on the ways, what suggestions to propose. But for a ceasefire, you need two sides. For a peace dialogue, you need two sides. And I think that the best way how to create a ground for a ceasefire and a peace dialogue is a unity, where unfortunately I have to say that sometimes the voice from Budapest is not helping to kind of create the unity of the transatlantic alliance in order to have the possibility to push for the ground where there will be a ceasefire and peace talks and hopefully solution to this bloody war where so many millions of people are living, losing their lives, they're living their future for the children. And I believe that what is very important is that we are sometimes maybe focusing on the differences, that who has a better idea, but I think that sometimes that could maybe be done behind the closed doors. But when we come to the public, we need to be more united, because then Russia sees the disagreements and is using it in its own advantage and strength and for own strengths.
It's very nice to see this genuine debate that's taking place here. Miriam, I want to ask you to quickly comment on the current state of the Slovak-Hungarian relations. From a particular angle, that's really interests me, that the Slovak mainstream parties, chiefly those on the progressive side, tend to downplay the cooperation within the V4 countries and Central Europe, and because they see such initiatives as Viktor Orbán's agenda to export his model of illiberal democracy. There's oftentimes talk in the Slovak media and from Slovak politicians about fears of Hungarian revanchism and revisionism from the political left, oftentimes, which is really surprising to me, because this used to be the topic of the Slovak far right, which sees today's Hungarian leadership in rather favorable terms, interestingly enough. So what do you believe are the reasons for Slovak politics' obsessions with Hungarian politics today? Because is there an obsession, right? Do I see that clearly, or what do you think?
I think the problem is that ideology today is playing enormously strong role in politics, and it's hijacking politics from many different sides. And I see it in the European Parliament, we see it on the European level, we see it on a national levels. I believe that the kind of common values of family, solidarity are still shared on both sides, in Slovakia and Hungary. Yes, I mean, we see that the progressive left is trying to kind of portray Hungary always as a villain, but that's a kind of the game which is going on the European level, and it's brought on the national level. But this, as I said, these ideological battles are happening in all countries, and we will never be able to avoid it. What I believe is very important, that there is enough of institutions, enough of forums, enough of places where Hungarians and Slovaks can seek maybe reconciliation from the past, which still often is being used by political leaders on both sides for gaining political points. So I believe that when we will reach a larger extent of reconciliation between the two nations, then we will have less political leaders who, because of ideological reasons or because of reasons of kind of trying to put the wedges among the two countries, are seeking to gain political points. That's very important. My uncle, maybe Zsolt, you even don't know that my uncle is František Mikloško, who was the speaker of the Slovak parliament, and he was the first person from Slovakia when he sought the reconciliation, and he apologized to the Hungarians for everything, for the Beneš decrees and for everything what happened in the past, from the side of the Slovaks. And these kind of gestures we need more on the political level, instead of what I said, that the gestures of gaining political points because of trying to deviate the future and the common path of these two nations.
If you allow me, I would like to add to this that to us, Slovakia is not seen as different political parties, but Slovakia is a neighbor to us, and the Slovak nation has some kind of common approach to fundamental questions in political life, and it is quite interesting that not just KDH, and I have read recently the book of Vladimir Palko in the Lion Cage. A book which I suggest you to read because this is a Slovak book about abortion, about euthanasia, about LGBT movements. These kind of very sensitive, I don't speak about ideology, I speak about fundamental questions of human life which are interrelated with politics. And the KDH has historically a very clear line on this subject. And I am very proud that František Mikloško, Jan Čarnogórsky, Mr. Palko, and hopefully Lexmann and Majersky and the present KDH is going to be successful, because very interestingly, in Slovakia, these values are not just shared by the Catholic Church, but it is very interesting that even the left, the political left in Slovakia, shares a lot of social conservative values. And the situation is the same in Hungary. It is not just a party political support what we have, but it is a broader one. And I would go beyond this. In the whole region, behind the Iron Curtain, we have the V4 as a strong force, exactly because of the strong social conservative values. It is not an accident that in Poland there is a very explicit Christian democratic conservative political force in power for a decade. Not an accident. It's not an accident that in a liberal party in Czechia has represented these values for a very long time. And Mr. Babiš's party is a strong, influential political party, though they are not conservative Christians, they are liberals. So I think when we talk about Central Europe, it is very important to consider this. And for us, Slovakia is not just a question of different political entities, but as a neighbor. And I hope it is the interest of Slovakia that such a voice like KDH is coming back. And it is exactly the same, but I hope that the Szövetség is going to come back also to the parliament and will be based on these values, which are the fundamental values of the Slovakian Hungarians. And the Slovakian Hungarians and the Christian Democratic Slovaks also share these fundamental values. And I can easily imagine a good coalition pattern out of these political parties, not just necessarily right parties, but those who share these fundamental values, who could be a very good partner in a future Central European cooperation.
Thank you.
But I have to react here because, Zsolt, the political left in Slovakia proclaims when it's in their profit to share these values, because they do know that the majority of the Slovaks do share the values, because these are the fundamental values humanity is based on, which is protection of life, human dignity, human rights. But unfortunately, in the European Parliament, they are in the progressive democratic left group, where they vote on the exact opposite. So for these reasons, there is no way we can unite with these kind of parties and cooperate with these kind of parties.
Perhaps I should illustrate with one specific case what I meant by the Slovak elite, Slovak discourse's obsession with Hungarian politics, because every time a Slovak politician who works on the field of foreign affairs goes to a television or gives an interview, he or she is supposed to condemn the vicious nature of the Hungarian regime, right? And this is very interesting to me. And in an interview more than a year ago, you stated that such politicians as the current Hungarian Foreign Minister Szijjártó are not the ideal type of conservative politicians in your mind. What led you to make this claim? And whenever you close your eyes and try to picture the ideal type of the conservative statesman, is it Zsolt that you see in front of your eyes, or how is it like?
When I say something, unless I change my mind, I really mean it. And I am happy to repeat it, my views here, because I don't shy away from my own views. I do my best to defend the conservative values the Hungarian government is trying to defend in the European Union. And I always stay on the side that, first of all, these values are values which we need to defend. Secondly, that there is a principle of subsidiarity in the European Union, which means that the EU's competencies are definitely not to decide on the family law, the healthcare issues, tax, and so on and so on. So the moral and ethical and questions should be decided on a lower level, because that's the full competence of the member state. And I do everything, and I vote against reports which are naming and shaming Hungary for its conservative views when it comes to the family and moral and ethical issues. When it comes to foreign policy, my criticism comes from the point that I believe that as a country which experienced totalitarian regime, where we learn how absolutely vital is to defend the human dignity and freedom of every person, for me, it's not conservative foreign policy when we extend friendly relations with countries like Belarus, Lukashenko. Hungary just signed another economic cooperation with Belarus, where we are not criticizing China for the absolute abuse of human rights, and not only in China, but actually the extension of threats are coming into our geopolitical spheres through cyber, digital technologies, as well as, for example, the Chinese police stations which operate illegally in our territories. And I believe that we need to be very clear, and with this kind of regimes, we have to stick to our values and stick to our principles, because when we deviate from these principles, maybe for economic win, it's very short-sighted, because this will, in a long term, and especially with countries like China, this will, in a long term, turn against us. I mean, I can bring examples later on in the debate, but this is where I come from when I criticize the foreign minister's positions.
Very briefly, if you want to.
It's getting a good challenge to compete with the concert, but I would like to express my gratitude to Miriam for representing this conservative Christian democratic voice in the European Parliament. I think this is a very important Slovak contribution to something which is happening in the European Parliament, namely the much stronger presence of social conservative forces on European level. And the basis of this social conservatism in the European Parliament is exactly what you said about subsidiarity. Yes, subsidiarity is the key value. We are not talking about a federal Europe, but we talk about a Europe of nations. When the European national sovereignty is respected by the European institutions, by the European Parliament, by the Commission, by the Council, that there are fundamental questions which are part of your moral policy, or we call it part of our constitutional identity. And each member state has a constitutional identity, and they have the right to decide about these questions by themselves. And that goes for the migration as well, because migration is also a fundamentally, in the end, moral question: who you want to live with, and what kind of cultural environment you want to create for the future generations. So this is one point. The second aspect of your comment about China. China, I would draw your attention to the NATO communique. This communique is 20 pages long, and it consists of 90 sub-paragraphs, and makes a very clear division between political enemies. They call political enemies threats. That is the NATO version of expressing who are the threats, fenyegetés in Hungarian. And threat is Russia and terrorism. Russia and terrorism, they are the threats in the evaluation of NATO. China is, for a very long time, was kept together with Russia as an important rival, challenge, danger, and so on. But now only Russia is regarded as a threat, and China is a challenge. But in many questions, in fundamental global questions, there is no solution for China, without China, including the war, dear friends, including the war. And not to speak about the economic dimensions. It is not us, Slovakia or Hungary, who will decide about the economic cooperation of the coming decades. It is not you, not us. It is the global economic players, like the United States of America or Germany. And if we compare our trade relations with China, we are just petty players in the corner. We have to realize that we need to represent not just our values, but we need to put very strong interests behind. The political life is always a combination. A political offer is a combination of values, but values require power behind.
We get to China and the US.
I need to say one last sentence. And it is very important that the European Parliament represents a view vis-à-vis the human rights situation in China. I agree with you, and I congratulate to you. And I think this is exactly what the European Union should be doing, to confront China with the human rights record of the country. It is the European job. The European Commission, the European Parliament, and the European institutions. And it is not necessarily the job of a nation state like Slovakia or Hungary to teach or to educate China out of human rights. Thank you.
But if I can react,
very briefly, please.
I have to react. I will try to be brief. It's not the role of China to teach, but it's not the role of Hungary or Slovakia to teach China, but I think it's the role of Hungary or Slovakia to say the truth, what we believe is about the regime. Because I was in the European Parliament trying to say that Russia is a danger because the language was already there for many years that Russia might invade and attack Ukraine, that we need to diversify. There was not this common agreement in the parliament. Many were silent. Russia was our partner. We need to cooperate. We need to deepen. We were following, even starting Nord Stream 2, when we already knew that our energy dependency from Russia might be a problem. I didn't follow the West. I was trying to say this might be a problem, and now it is a problem. Our energy dependency is a problem. Belarus the same. I mean, European Union has many ways of cooperation with Belarus. We lifted the sanctions. We started again involving in dialogue. Orban Viktor was in Belarus before the last elections when the leader of the Christian Democrats was already in prison. The Europe still believed that Belarus is on its way to democracy slow. I was criticizing this because I said, no way. I mean, when the leader of the Christian Democrats is already in prison before the elections, we have to call this regime as it is, and we should really unify our position vis-à-vis Belarus. And when it comes to China, again, when the German presidency have concluded the negotiations on the investment deal with China, it was few of us in the European Parliament. We said, no way, we should not sign this investment because it's a danger for economic interests and for human rights for the EU. We have to stop it. We did very hard. That's why I'm on the sanction list. I mean, I do understand that there is the kind of nations, the NATO, the EU positions are moving slowly. We are discussing and having endless discussions if China is a rival or is a threat. These rhetorics exams. But there always have to be voices, and I hope and believe that these voices will be always from Central Eastern Europe coming because of our totalitarian past, naming the regimes as they are. If they are a danger, we need to call them a danger. When they are a danger for human dignity in their countries, when they are committing crimes against own people, we have to name this and not to be silent, because if we are silent because of a short-term economic gains, in a long term, we are going to lose this battle.
One more reaction, and then Balázs, you have the floor back. So I suggest you warmly to read the language of the NATO summit. The NATO summit has created a common language. How we common in a united way, we speak about Russia, how it is a threat, and how we talk about China, challenge, but as many times you can read that they are a partner for dialogue. We need to have the Chinese on board in order to solve fundamental questions. And I don't want to question your approach. It is needed. There is always a division of labor in democracies. Somebody raises a problem, others oppose it, and then we come to a compromise. But the common denominator, the common language is in this communique. And this communique, I think, is a milestone in Vilnius, not only in the approach towards Turkey or towards the war itself or Ukraine. We haven't touched upon this question. Invitation of NATO was postponed, but in the relationship towards China as well.
Okay, from this point on, the rule applies that you are answering to my questions only because we are running out of time very dangerously. And I had all the intention to discuss the Chinese communists, but first I wanted to discuss one particular Slovak communist, nominal social democrat Robert Fico, who I get the sense that the Hungarian government is trying to win over Robert Fico and his Smer party to make him an ally. Fico has made numerous appearances on Hungarian national television and even held a joint press conference with the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs, which is quite unusual for a politician in opposition. And, you know, this is a particularly hard pill to swallow for members of the Hungarian community in Slovakia, given Fico's previous anti-Hungarian and anti-minority stance. So the majority of the local Hungarian community is opposed to this. Of course, our elites are a very different question, who are always eager to adapt whatever is in vogue in Budapest, even when it comes to Fico. My question to you, Zsolt, is that is a priority for Hungary to secure a close allyship in a Fico-led government if it indeed forms after the snap elections?
We would like to have a close and friendly relationship with any Slovak government after the elections. And we are going to abstain from deciding who is going to be the choice of the Hungarian government. This is the decision of the Slovak people. But I would like to be correct and fair with Fico. Fico had a terrible record against the Hungarians before 2010. We never should forget the name Malina Hedvig. And if you haven't read the book of Malina Hedvig, do it. It is in Slovak available as well. It is a fantastic book. How she and what kind of terror she had to go through. Or I could mention a lot of other anti-Hungarian steps, but mainly the atmosphere which was before 2010 between Hungary and Slovakia. And now, in Slovakia, you have got a Hungarian Prime Minister, Odor László. He is not a candidate of Szövetség yet, but he is a Hungarian. And you have a Hungarian finance minister. You know, with the before 2010 situation, you couldn't have achieved this. And in the last 13 years, we have gone through a very fundamental transformation in the Slovak-Hungarian relations. And I think Fico, we have to pay credit to the role he played in this, how he has been able to change. We are not recognizing the Fico before 2010, but we are recognizing a guy who was able to change 180% his position. And I think it is the Slovaks' decision, the Slovakian decision, who is going to be the next prime minister, the next government coalition. We would like to have obviously like-minded people. And I said before that what are those fundamental values which we represent: Europe of nations, social conservative values, morality in politics, what Miriam so loudly experienced. Obviously, this is what we are about, and what we hope that in a European broader and Central European broader cooperation, we will have partners. And we would like to have partners from Slovakia for this as well, because we have a partner in Poland, we have a partner now in Italy. There is a very strong partnership in Finland, in Sweden. Sweden, let's underline the new NATO member, Sweden, in this regard. And we would love to have a strong partner in Slovakia as well.
Perhaps you could elaborate on a bit on your party's position vis-a-vis Fico. Would you form a joint government with him after the elections?
We have excluded a government with Fico and his party, because this party, I mean, when it comes to Hungary, obviously the position is very well portrayed by the story of Hedvika Malinova, or Malina, who suffered because of the Fico's government position on the Hungarian, and because of what I was mentioning before, that they were trying to use the past, which was not reconciled between Slovaks and Hungarians, to bring political points, and this was absolutely irresponsible. During the Fico's government, our journalist Jan Kuciak and his fiancée were killed. This is absolutely intolerable, and of course the involvement of the government is still being looked into, but still this has happened during Fico's government. We have lots of corruption scandals. The government has stolen the country and has abused its political power. And that's why the Christian Democrats can never go in a coalition with such a government. Above all, the party of Fico is based on the former communists. Fico himself in 2018 went to Cuba to meet Castro. He's visiting and Blaha, his ideologists. They're visiting receptions in embassies of countries which are totalitarian or left regimes. For us, as a Christian Democrats, this is definitely not a partner. On the European level, the MEPs elected on a smear list are my adversaries. I mean, they are really supporters of the left ideologies. I mean, one thing is the rhetorics here at home, but completely different are the positions. When did the government of Fico or any of the ministers was defending subsidiarity, was defending Hungary in its positions on family matters or on LGBT rights or promotion of certain living standards? It has never happened. Fico is not someone who defends subsidiarity, is not someone who defends that the member states should decide about the family laws, about the laws, which of course within certain limits, I mean, of defending the dignity of every person, but what is a marriage and what is not a marriage, if there should be a gay partnership established or not. These are the laws which the member state should decide, with the full respect of course to everyone, including the LGBT people, and full defense of their rights as human rights. But these are the issues which should be decided on the member states level. And Fico, this is the subsidiarity principle, this is how the EU should function, and the government of Fico was never defending this. And when we vote on the issues which are actually meddling into the family laws in the European Parliament, which I always said that we should not even discuss these issues in the European Parliament because it's not our competence. The members elected on the Fico's list are opposing my views.
Thank you.
I have the impression that KDH is gathering plenty of young voters here today with your statements. We mentioned China, we discussed NATO in great lengths. I want to move on and discuss the Americans. I feel like the other division that became more pronounced over the over the recent years relates to the question of American leadership within the Western alliance. The Poles and the Baltics here again believe that only the US can guarantee their security, and see European countries like Germany or France as hopelessly naive and incapable of organizing a joint response against such thing as the Russian aggression. Now, the ruling Slovak establishment can be characterized as pro-US, while here again, Hungarian officials tend to portray the US as a power meddling in European affairs, using both Brussels and Ukraine alike as proxies to maintain their global hegemony. What should be our approach towards the US as Central European countries? Would you begin, please, your answer?
I think the relationship, I will actually start with the quote of the Hungarian former Prime Minister Antal József, who said, "When freedom is endangered, the people in Europe always turn to America." The dominant position of the US in the global world is also because we have completely neglected our own defense. We didn't even keep our promises, and we were always kind of resting assured that the US, if it comes to the worst, will defend us. And that has also allowed for the US to have a dominant position. We should have been more partners rather than someone who is a kind of younger brother waiting that the bigger brother will always defend you. Because that will also help the US to play a different role if they will have a shared power with the EU. So that's first of all. Second, well, I also think that we have to, I mean, the US is our natural ally because it's sharing the same values. And we always, within the transatlantic cooperation with the US, we always have to try to make sure that the shared values of defending of freedom and dignity and rule of law and international agreements should be embraced and try to defend in the world. There was a very nice quote of Marco Rubio, who said, I mean, and this is already on China, but it kind of fits here, who said that, yes, now the most dominant country is the US, but the world will be very different if the most dominant country in the world will be a totalitarian communist China.
Maybe you could elaborate on the idea of the EU strategic autonomy. Again, in the last months we saw that basically all strategic decisions are made in Washington, and it seems like Europe cannot create its own responses to crises in its neighborhood. For example, when there was the issue of sending tanks to Ukraine, the Germans weren't able to decide about it on their own, and the chancellor said that, okay, we can perhaps send our own tanks in case the US does so. Right, so we see here some kind of vassalization of the U.S.-Hungarian relationship. I mean U.S.-European relationship. Is this vassalization unavoidable, or can Europe achieve greater autonomy vis-a-vis the U.S.? What do you think about this?
Concerning America, I would like to start with first that America today is not like an America 10 years ago. As we are a bit different as well, but probably the changes in the US have been much more fundamental. Today, I see a United States which is fundamentally, deeply divided. And this division results in a weakening ability to maintain that leadership role which we are used to in the past 30 years. And this situation is not in the interest of the whole Western world. But this is a fact we need to confront with. This division is going to maintain until definitely the next elections in the United States. And we don't know what kind of tendencies will influence these elections. But one thing seems to be sure to me, that Trumpism, I don't know what is going to be the future of Mr. Trump, but Trumpism, the ideology of Trumpism is going to remain a decisive player in the American foreign policy. So this is one important remark which I wanted to make about the United States. Secondly, about the role in the field of security. NATO summit was a success. It was a success to the American foreign policy as well. Mr. Biden was very instrumental in making an agreement with Erdogan. Erdogan was the other winner of this summit from various perspectives. Turkey is now going through a rehabilitation, primarily a rehabilitation by the United States. And this division between Turkey and the US was absolutely not the interest of the alliance and of us. But this seems to be also over, and Turkey is coming closer to Europe, is a decisive player in the European future as well. So there is a fundamental common interest in defense. United States and NATO remains the prime guarantor for the European security. And this is acknowledged even by those who are loud about the strategic autonomy. But I think the strategic autonomy as a formula is an extremely important and valid formula. Why? Because fundamentally the European and the American interests per definitionem are not the same. The two interests are separate. And we need to be aware to this very clear fact. Just look at the war, how the war hits Europe and how the war favors the United States. Our interests diverge through the lens of the war very clearly and very vividly. So strategic autonomy in the field of security, I think, is a valid formula. America, especially Donald Trump at that time, made very clear that no more free lunch for Europe. And that was an awakening signal by Trump. And since then, out of 31 NATO member states, 11 was able to achieve the 2% military expenditure. Hungary is among them, I would like to tell you. But we are only the 1/3 who are able to supply and satisfy the 2% threshold and the 20% for development under this category. So the strategic autonomy for the European security is a complementary security component, which is complementary to the security guarantee of NATO and the United States. But as a complementary element, I think it is vitally important. And finally, about the war, I don't think that if we had a stronger American leadership, we would now be confronted with the war. I was privileged to visit 1 year ago, last August, Donald Trump. Personally, with Orbán Viktor, we were received by Donald Trump. Donald Trump, since then, repeated many times, if I was the president, there wouldn't have been war. And if I will be the president, there will be no war. And I think this is a fundamental question today, how America is going to be able to finish the war because it is not you, my friend, who will finish this war. It will be the United States and great powers like China. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I've been told by the organizers that we run out of time. But Miriam, just very quickly to follow up on that, do you believe that Europe can achieve greater autonomy without deepening the integration? You told us previously that there are certain cultural issues, that there shouldn't be a joint decision-making process within the EU. What about the security issue and the military issue? How do you see that?
First of all, this whole world strategic autonomy is a kind of rhetoric exercise, which we don't know exactly what it means, and I think we need to think about what are we going to do rather than discussing if we are autonomous or not and strategic or not. And the same exercise goes when it comes to China, when we are discussing if China is our partner, ally, or adversary. And I mean, I think we need to come and kind of analyze concrete situations